It grabbed national attention in 1997 when a man calling himself Mel Waters contacted radio talk show host Art Bell on his national talk show Coast to Coast. The mysterious pit has become known as Mel's Hole.
Modern geology claims the Earth is a tomb of dead stone, but what you're about to hear suggests otherwise. When a camera was thrown into Mel's Hole that defied every law of physics, it didn't hit the floor. It found what looked like a massive geographical throat. The footage captured at 80,000 feet wasn't just an anomaly, it was a warning. And it leaves us wondering, have we finally filmed the entrance to a nightmare we weren't meant to survive? Most mysteries begin with a discovery, but this one started with a phone call that left millions of listeners in total shock. The call that changed everything. It all began on February 21st, 1997. Late-night radio host Art Bell was broadcasting his famous show, Coast to Coast AM. During the broadcast, a call came in from a man named Mel Waters. This man didn't sound like a typical conspiracy theorist or someone looking for a quick buck. Instead, he sounded like a regular guy from rural Washington who had found something on his land that he simply could not explain. On that call, Mel Waters talked about a strange hole on a piece of land he owned on Manastash Ridge near Ellensburg, Washington. He told Art Bell that the hole was at least 80,000 feet deep.
Central Washington State is a mystery. A strange pit claimed to be as deep as 80,000 feet.
Now, to put that in perspective, this is about 15 miles down into the crust of the Earth. Mel claimed he had spent hours lowering miles of weighted fishing line into the darkness. He used spool after spool, tying them together as the weight kept dropping, and said he never felt the line hit a solid floor. The sheer scale of this claim was enough to make anyone stop what they were doing and listen. Now, the physical properties of the pit were even stranger than its depth. Mel talked about something he called the anti-echo phenomenon. He explained that if you stood at the edge and shouted as loud as you could, no sound came back. In a normal cave or a deep well, you expect to hear your voice bounce off the walls. But in this hole, the darkness seemed to swallow the vibrations entirely. It was as if the pit was an empty void that refused to interact with the world above it. This detail added a layer of eerie silence to the story that caught the imagination of every listener that night. Mel also mentioned that his neighbors had been using the hole as a private dump for decades. They threw everything in there, from old kitchen appliances like refrigerators to heavy construction debris. They even dropped dead livestock down the shaft. And despite decades of people tossing their heavy trash into the abyss, the hole never filled up. There was never a sound of an object hitting the bottom, and strangely, there was never any smell of decay. Usually, a pit filled with old trash and animals would create a massive stench, yet Mel's hole remained as fresh as the mountain air around it. Another strange thing Mel reported was how his dogs also sensed the danger from this hole. He revealed that no matter how hard he pulled, they would anchor their paws in the dirt and fight the leash, fearing for what lay beneath the surface. Strange, right? But of course not everyone believed him right away. The paranormal community was split. Some saw Mel as a visionary who had found a gateway to another world, while others thought he was a clever storyteller playing a prank on a global audience. Skeptics pointed out the scientific problems with his story. For instance, the deepest hole ever dug by humans is the Kola Super Deep borehole in Russia, and this project, which took years of advanced engineering, only reached about 7.5 miles deep. Also, there was a point it got to where the heat was so intense that it began to melt the drill bits. But then Mel was claiming his hole was twice as deep and perfectly stable. While the depth of the hole was hard to believe, the story took a darker turn when Mel revealed the pit's power over life and death. The neighbor's dog. One of the most chilling stories Mel shared with Art Bell involved a neighbor who decided to give his favorite hunting dog a final resting place. He dropped the animal's body into the abyss, expecting the hole to hold his friend forever. However, what happened next was something that felt truly impossible. Mel claimed that later that same day, the neighbor saw his dog running through the woods. It was the exact animal he had lost, and was even wearing the same leather collar it had on when it was dropped into the pit. With the man being stunned, he called out his dog, but the creature did not react. It looked healthy and strong, yet moved with a strange, detached focus, as if it was inhabited by a completely different spirit. Now, this particular incident sent shockwaves through the radio audience because it changed the rules of the mystery. It proved the hole wasn't just geography, but a biological reprinter that spat back anomalies defying every law of nature. Everyone stopped asking how deep the hole went and started asking what it was doing to our world. As word of the living hole went viral, the authorities moved in, and Mel's property suddenly became the most dangerous place in Washington. The Men in Black and the $1 million bribe. Mel's life took a sharp turn into a spy movie when he tried to return to his land one afternoon. Instead of the quiet mountain road he knew, he found a wall of black SUVs and men in crisp suits blocking the way. These agents didn't waste time with pleasantries. They told Mel that a plane had crashed on his property and the entire area was now a restricted biohazard zone. It was a classic cover story, but Mel knew it was all a ruse. Something bigger was at play, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. He was being pushed off his own dirt by people who didn't have name tags. The situation turned from tense to terrifying very quickly. Mel claimed these men made it seem like his safety was at risk. When he didn't give in, the officials threatened that he could easily disappear if he didn't cooperate with their demands. This wasn't a request, it was a total takeover. However, they didn't only use threats. They offered him a deal that sounded too strange to be true. The government reportedly offered him $250,000 per month to lease the land and leave the country immediately. But then there was one very specific and bizarre catch to this whole deal, which was Mel relocating all the way to Australia. The official reason they gave him was even weirder. They claimed they needed his help with a wombat preservation project, which seemed like a ridiculous excuse to get him as far away from the Monastash Ridge because, when we look at it, Mel Waters was not a wombat expert at all. After much pressure from these officials, Mel eventually took the money and left, but he felt like he was being hunted every step of the way. This forced exile was the beginning of a massive digital erasure. At some point, Mel Waters stopped giving updates to Art Bell about his strange hole. It left people wondering, were the things about the hole a real or cooked-up story? Later on, when investigative journalists tried to verify his story, they ran into a brick wall. They searched every public record in Kittitas County and found no mention of a man named Mel Waters owning any land there. It was as if his entire identity and his property had been scrubbed from the map, but the truth was that the government had already scrapped all evidence and information. While the $1 million bribe seemed like a lucky break, the cost of Mel's silence was far higher than he ever imagined when the government decided to take back control. The Lost Memory and the San Francisco Awakening. In the year 2000, Mel Waters eventually tried to return to the United States to reclaim his life and find his property, but the man who stepped off that plane was not the same person who had left. He described a terrifying gap in his timeline where 12 days of his life simply vanished. He had no memory of where he had been or who he had spoken to during that time. It was a complete mental blackout that left him feeling like a stranger in his own body. The physical state he was in when he finally woke up was even more disturbing. Mel claimed he found himself shivering in a dirty San Francisco alleyway with no idea how he got there. When he checked his reflection, he discovered that several of his back teeth were missing, as if they had been surgically removed. To make matters worse, his arms were covered with needle marks. It looked as if he had been held captive and used as a human pincushion for experimental substances. This was a far cry from the cushy life the government had promised him in exchange for his land. Also, the financial security he thought he had secured was gone. When he checked his bank accounts, the millions of dollars from the government lease had been completely drained. He was broke, injured, and being followed by unmarked vans that seemed to appear at every corner. His phone lines were constantly buzzing with the sounds of static and clicking, which was an obvious sign that his private conversations were being recorded. Mel felt like a target in a massive game of cat and mouse where the hunters had all the power. Despite this chaos, Mel claimed a strange medical miracle had occurred. He revealed he had previously suffered from terminal esophageal cancer, but after spending so much time near the hole, his doctors found out that the disease had completely disappeared. But then, besides the one good thing that happened to him, his personal life had also been dismantled. Mel's wife, who was supposedly a well-respected university professor, had her entire professional history wiped away. Records of her tenure, her research, and even her employee ID seemed to have been scrubbed from every database. It was as if she never existed. By doing all of these, the authorities vowed to make sure no one would have a reason to believe Mel Waters if he eventually spoke. However, the Mel we knew wasn't going to stay mute at all. After a while, he finally made a call to Art Bell. During the call, Mel sounded like a man on the run from a shadow government. He was desperate and terrified, yet he remained convinced that the truth was worth the risk. He knew that the authorities could take his mysterious hole, money, and memory, but they couldn't take what he had seen, which was the truth. But as the government thought they had silenced Mel by stripping his past away, a mysterious group reached out with coordinates to a new location that defied all logic. The second hole, the Nevada Discovery. Mel didn't stay down for long after his ordeal in San Francisco. He was soon contacted by a group of Native Americans who claimed they had been watching his story closely. They told him about another spot, a second hole hidden in the high deserts of Nevada.
And no, this is not a mine. This is a cave of southern and southeastern Nevada.
Now, this wasn't just a random pit in the sand. Local Basque shepherds had known about this place for hundreds of years. They used it for ancient rituals and treated it with a level of respect that bordered on fear. When Mel arrived, he realized this new site was much more sophisticated than the dirt hole back in Washington. The first thing Mel noticed was a man-made metallic collar surrounding the opening. This metal rim wasn't cold, like you would expect. It felt warm to the touch, as if it was drawing heat from deep within the planet. Also, the area around it was also thick with a strange energy. If you walked within 50 feet of the opening with a camera or a cell phone, the electronics would simply fry and stop working. What made it stranger was the way the ground felt. Mel described a rhythmic pulse, more like a vibration that felt like the earth was actually breathing. It was like a steady thump, something that suggested something massive was alive far below the ground. Immediately, Mel and a group of Native Americans began running tests, which produced results that defied every possibility in science. In one experiment, they lowered a bucket of ice into the pit. When they pulled it back up, the ice hadn't melted at all despite the desert heat. Instead, it had transformed into a bizarre, flammable solid. They lit a small piece of it on fire, and it burned for weeks, yet it didn't melt. It was as if the hole had rewritten the chemical laws of the water itself. Also, the depth of this second hole was a moving target, because each time they tried to measure it, the numbers changed. It felt like the bottom of the pit was shifting, or even moving toward them. Almost everything about the Nevada site suggested it was a twin to the one in Washington, and Mel began to believe these holes were connected by a massive underground tunnel system that stretched across the western United States. It wasn't just a geological fluke, it was a network. With the ground literally breathing beneath their feet, the crew lowered a camera into the dark, unaware that the footage would eventually terrify everyone who heard the story. What the cameras filmed. Mel knew that a simple story wouldn't be enough to convince the world of what he had found. To prove these pits were part of a larger, mysterious system, he needed visual evidence that would be impossible to ignore. Working with a group of locals, it was said that Mel and the group of Native Americans constructed a specialized camera rig. They encased the lens in a thick, lead-lined housing to protect it from the intense radiation and magnetic fields that had fried every other piece of equipment nearby. As the camera descended, the footage revealed a world that looked nothing like a typical rock formation. Mel described the walls of the pit as having a strange, crystalline texture that almost looked like living flesh. Instead of dark stone, the camera captured bioluminescent blue veins that pulsed with light as if the hole were the throat of a massive organism. Even the temperature readings opposed the laws of physics. At depths where the heat should have been enough to melt the casing, the equipment remained cool and functional. But unfortunately, no actual video from these Nevada experiments has ever been released to the public. Mel claimed he had previously sent a tape from the original hole in Washington to the radio station, but this new footage remains a ghost. Without the physical tape, we are left only with the haunting descriptions of a place where the earth seems to be alive. But the mystery of this depth was only the beginning. The real terror started when Mel and the group of Native Americans decided to lower something alive into the darkness: the sheep experiment and the internal seal. This second hole discovery felt like a second chance for Mel to prove he wasn't crazy.
Be a pathway to the paranormal. Como4's Denise Whitaker heads east in search of the hole.
He was determined to get eyes on the bottom this time, no matter the cost. Mel Waters and his team wanted to know if the hole held some kind of strange energy that could affect biological life. To test this theory, they decided to use a live sheep. The team placed the animal inside a sturdy crate and slowly began lowering it into the abyss. They wanted to see if the sheep would survive the trip, or if the environment deep underground would change it in some way. As the crate moved further down, the sheep began to make terrible sounds. It was a frantic, high-pitched screaming that signaled pure animal panic. These sounds echoed up the shaft for a while until the crate reached a specific depth. At that moment, the screaming stopped instantly. It was replaced by a heavy, unnatural silence that felt even more disturbing than the cries. Mel continued to lower the line for a bit longer before deciding it was time to bring the animal back up to the surface. When the crate finally reached the top, the sheep was dead. There were no marks on its body and no signs of a struggle, but the animal looked very different. Mel claimed that the sheep felt altered, as if its very physical makeup had been shifted during the descent. The most horrifying part came when they decided to examine the remains. Upon opening the animal, they did not find its typical internal organs. Instead, they found a gelatinous, seal-like creature nestled inside the chest cavity. This creature was unlike anything found in nature. Mel described it as having skin that felt like a seal, but with eyes that looked shockingly human. But then it did not seem hostile. Instead, the creature looked at Mel and his team as if it were communicating that it belonged in the darkness and that the surface world was the true stranger. After a brief, chilling moment of eye contact, the creature crawled out of the sheep and slipped back into the hole on its own. While Mel approached the mystery like a scientist, a local man warned that the pit was actually something far more dangerous than it seemed. The legend of Red Elk. An inner tribal medicine man, Red Elk,
a Native American shaman or medicine man,
claimed his ancestors had known about these interdimensional doorways for centuries. To him, the hole wasn't just a geological oddity, it was a spiritual battery for the Earth and a literal entry point to a massive underground civilization. He warned that the hole extended 24 and 28 miles into a great city within the Earth's crust, where ancient beings resided, watching the surface world with a detached, superior intelligence. Red Elk's warnings were both spiritual and physical. He believed the hole acted as a drain for the planet's energy, which explained why watches stopped and electronics failed near the rim. More importantly, he issued a dire prediction regarding the government's interference. He claimed that if the military ever succeeded in plugging the hole with concrete or debris, the resulting pressure would lead to a catastrophic tectonic or volcanic event. To Red Elk, the hole was a pressure valve for the planet, and anyone who tried to close it was an act of extreme arrogance that could end in disaster. Now, whether or not the scientific claims of Mel Waters or the shamanic warnings of Red Elk are true, the story of the hole remains one of the most chilling mysteries of the modern age. It makes us really think if there truly are parts of our world that are off limits to human curiosity. But then, if you found a bottomless pit in your backyard, would you have the courage to look inside, or would you leave the abyss to its secrets? Tell us what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. For more content like this, tap on the next video on your screen.